Hey friends, you probably knew that TextControl is a powerful library for document editing and PDF generation, but did you also know that they're a strong supporter of the developer community? And it's part of their mission to build and support a strong community by being present, by listening to users, and by sharing knowledge at conferences across Europe and the United States. If you're heading to a conference soon, maybe check if TextControl will be there. Stop by and say hi. You'll find their full conference calendar at textcontrol.com. That's TEXT control.com. Hi, friends. I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of chatting with Stephen Jones, former senior engineering manager at Living Computer Museum and now at Interim Computer Museum. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Thanks, Scott.
This is great. We got to meet each other in person at the first time at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo, which was just a delight in Portland, Oregon every year. It was massive. All generations were there and present, and the Interim Computer Museum was there with a ton of hardware.
Yeah, we had 8 tables actually. Hans Reuter invited us to come down to his booth, gave us 8 tables, and scrambled to get a bunch of things together for it.
Is that such a challenge, though? I mean, when you're moving vintage hardware, are you afraid you're going to break something or it's going to get shaken up, or do you just put it in the back of a car and do the best you can?
Well, I think we did pretty good. We used moving blankets, and most of the things that we brought were microcomputers, and typically like Commodore 64s, where hundreds of thousands of units were produced. But the most fragile thing we brought was a 1970 MLAC PDS-1, and that was for running Space War, and that survived the trip. So I'm happy about that.
Fantastic. So, at the Living Computer Museum, where you were at for many years, I remember visiting, going up in Seattle, and it was Living Computer Museum, and then later it became Living Computers Museum and Labs. It had vintage tech, it had contemporary tech. Was this all part of Paul Allen's kind of collection of vintage computing hardware and his like habit of restoring systems? Because I know he loved this long before he started the museum.
That's right. This actually goes back to PDP Planet, and even before PDP Planet, there was
Mm.
1997. The first machine called the Toad One was brought online, and post on AltSys PDP-10 was made in December of '97
Oh, wow.
to invite people to use this system and request accounts and such. So there was this idea to have vintage systems remotely accessible for a long time, and then into the PDP Planet days, and then finally in 2012, Bob Barnett and Robert Michaels were able to open what became Living Computers.
People associate living computers with Paul Allen, probably because he was the one who had the most money and the most equipment. But it sounds like the passion for living computers, in the non-proper noun way of saying it, computers that are actually still working, not broken things behind glass. It predates Paul. There's a whole group of people that are excited about retro computing, including myself.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's been a number of computer museums over the years that have come and gone, most notably the Boston Computer Museum, which was actually started by DEC,
Oh, wow.
uh, was acquired by the Computer History Museum, gosh, about 25 years or so ago, maybe longer ago, actually, and was stored at Moffett Field for a long time before CHM got the Silicon Graphics building.
Is this an uncommon thing? I mean, there's you can go and see art everywhere. Every city has an art museum, but other than living computers and maybe MIM's Museum of Technology, I don't personally know of. I don't think about every city having its own computing museum.
There are quite a few
Hmm.
actually in the state of varying sizes.
Mm.
And then you'll come across just the most amazing collections. There's one in Ome, which is outside of Tokyo, that it's called the Micron Museum or the Dream. Let's see, oh, what do they call it? Something about dream technology. But I got to visit that last year. That was an amazing collection, and I just had never heard of it. They're in a, I think they're in a former MUFG Mitsubishi bank building, and that they crowdfunded and got, and
Hmm.
it's that is a pretty amazing collection. Of course, it's Japanese heavy as far as what they have, but they've got some amazing things.
Yeah, and I guess there's a computer history museum in Mountain View. There's one in Bozeman,
Right.
Montana. But
Yes.
I feel like I'd love to see a world where there was one in every city. Certainly in North America, it would be glorious if everyone could have that feeling of seeing these machines working 50 years after their first shipping.
I can guarantee you there's probably at least 10 basements in every city that has a mini museum with
That
running
is
computers.
absolutely true. And a lot of people have these things and they don't know what to do with them and they don't know how to get
Yeah,
involved.
yeah.
I've got a lot of older stuff, certainly not anything as wonderful as the things that are behind you. For folks that might be seeing this on YouTube, Stephen is in the Interim Computer Museum right now, and there's working machines behind him of all flavors. And he was so kind enough to go into the office today. I'm afraid all I was able to do was bring my little Altair Mini, and I've got my PyDP 11 from Obsolescence Guaranteed behind me, which is all I can handle. But you're right. The basements of many people of a certain age exist and ready to go, and they don't know where to do these things, where to do with them. But can they make donations, or do you just need cash to make museums like this work?
I think, well, in my experience, especially with living computers, the community is the most important aspect. And
Hmm.
it's not, I mean, there's a lot to say about funding, but it's really about the community you build around your museum and those people supporting either by volunteering or just becoming members or supporting doing things or and sharing stories as well, because that's really the benefit of having a community focused museum. The other thing too is that most technology museums or history museums do not have technical staff. In fact, I found that many museums may have a curation team, but they tend to have outsourced the building of exhibits and even bring in contractors for interpretation. So they keep the staff minimal. And that was a big difference for living computers that we had, 7 full-time engineers, which is just unheard of for any technical museum.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like knowing how to not just keep them running, whether it be replacing capacitors at the low level or whether it be at the high level of designing what is it that someone should see on this machine? What game should they be able to play? What app is going to light up a little kid's eyes when they see it running on one of these vintage machines? That does require effort. You can't just put them in a box behind glass and say, look at that old thing. It's got to be interactive.
That's right. Yeah. When the computer is behind glass, I mean, what are we celebrating here? It's you're celebrating industrial design, which is great. There's a lot of great industrial design and product design that go into these machines and devices. But to have the visceral experience, whether you've had it before or you had it for the first time, at a museum, that's really important to convey the importance of preserving these machines.
Yeah, it's so important. Like restoration and making the formerly white now yellowed plastic outside is not just you have to have interaction readiness of
Right.
these vintage machines, which I know that you oversaw everything from restoration to keeping them running. Now, I had brought my kids. I've got pictures of my kids
Hmm.
at Living Computer Museum. I know that so many people in the Northwest and all over the world that visited Living Computers have pictures of their families and the excitement and that, like you said, that visceral thing. But
Hmm.
then when it closed operations during COVID, it didn't just hit Living Computers, it hit like all the kind of interactive centers whose business model was visitor access. It wasn't just rich people keeping the thing running, it was community, that, as you point out, that kept it running.
Yeah. Yeah. It really was. And one thing that LCM had going for it at that point was the remote systems that were part of PDP Planet originally,
Mm.
predated the opening of the museum. those were still available online, and people could experience the museum through that. But then, also think as we came out of COVID, all the protocols, especially the 20, late 2020, 2021. I just hope we never have to go through that again. But the hand sanitizing and masks and all of that had to be done, and limiting numbers of people that could be together. It's We really lived through a horrible experience, and I would say that in regards to how LCM had thought about reopening at that point, it was very measured at that time, uh, and
Yeah.
of course we didn't end up doing that.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that when you have a collection of art, or in this case, it is art. These vintage computer machines. There's the ones that are owned by Paul Allen's estate. There's ones that are owned by the underlying museum, independent nonprofit, and then there's of course the business model, which is the operational, keeping the lights on from a month by
Yeah.
month. And that's from the perspective of someone who loved the Living Computer Museum. I was like, why doesn't a billionaire just fix it? It's more complicated than that. And now the Living Computer Museum is gone, and that model was not able to succeed. But what is different about the Interim Computer Museum, which has so much of those assets, and how can we keep it alive?
Well, I think the big difference is, again, having this community focused and community supported. Right now, the real focus is covering the lease, covering the utilities, and getting the word out, participating in the community events like Portland Retro Gaming Expo, and next year we've got Vintage Computer Festival Pacific Northwest coming back in May,
Hmm.
which we're sponsoring. So my team is being really measured in regards to that. We've got, let's see, as of today, 356 members and sponsors, and there's various tiers for that.
Hmm.
But we also just had our first um, let's see, surplus quarter, so that 3 months of not having a deficit. So that's really good. Where we're showing that, focusing on just preserving what we have with some limited space, and having it supported by the community. That's the trajectory we're on. When it gets to the point of whether or not there's going to be jobs or contractors, that's the next step. But for now, we're on a trajectory. I should also mention that SDF.org, which is also an organization I'm a part of, and is a long-running community-focused, basically an ISP. It started as a bulletin board system in 1987, moved to Unix in 1990, and then got on the internet in 1991. And it formed as a nonprofit rather than a commercial entity. So even though it didn't make a lot of money through the 90s, it was able to get to a self-sustaining model through membership by the end of the 90s, and it basically survived Dot Bomb because of that. And it's because it has such a long history, there tends to be retro aspects to it, but it's always been about the Unix platform and hosting what the community wants, facilitating new ideas on this Unix platform without trying to be too retro.
Hmm.
If you probably had a dial-up ISP account in the 90s, and one of the options was a shell account. I mean, almost every ISP had shell servers, and sadly, that kind of died out, mostly because of security issues, but because SDF's strong community around the Unix shell, that's just the main part of it, and then we build upon that. So Interim Computer Museum, however, took on the vintage remote systems that SDF had done and then had combined with Living Computers remote systems. And this is in a GeekWire article from last year in June, where announcing that that had been done. So Interim Computer Museum is a new nonprofit that was formed this year. We got our charitable status in April. So that's the retro is here, and SDF is continuing to do its modern Unix things.
And SDF is worth calling out for not just the services that they've provided for so very long, but also these vintage systems. If you want to explore them, you can go to connect.sdf.org and search basically SSH from your browser, or if you like,
Right.
SSH from your command line into their menu. And there's a dozen or more vintage systems that are living and playing up there that you can run. Some are simulators and some are real. So if you don't have an Altair Mini behind you like I do, or a simulator of a PDP-11, you or your kids or your family can go and play with that. And joining and paying as a member is extremely easy. It's free for students, and certainly even a lifetime membership can still only be like $36. So you can really make a big difference when you get involved with either SDF or ICM. And I think I told you before we started recording that I signed up at the exec level for ICM. And in doing that, I get permission to visit. And I think that's the most important thing, is that if you're in or around the Interim Computer Museum by becoming a member, you get to go and make an appointment and bring the family and check it out. And that's gets to the point of community, right? A museum is
Right.
nothing unless people can see it and touch these things.
Yeah. And again, like you said, that Bootstrap membership, which is the Bootstrap membership is $36 a year, and that is actually the legacy vintage systems program that was at SDF.
Lovely.
Uh, and that gets you access to 26 remote systems. It's a mix of real hardware, hybrid hardware, which has partial simulation, and then full simulation. And it's one thing you mentioned, the PyDP-11. So this is a great example. And the PyDP-10 is an also interesting example as well, because the sheer numbers that have been produced of those versus how many actually were created by DEC, it's staggering that Oscar has made so many. I think he's over 1,000 PyDP-10s, and of course DEC only made maybe 260 of the KA. But it's if you're using these systems remotely on real hardware or simulated hardware, again, the focus is the community. We have contrib directories and structures where people can write their own programs and share it with each other, or port a game that was, only on some obscure Unix platform, to many other Unix platforms. So that's the focus of remote access. And then as far as visiting is concerned, so currently we're open Saturdays, Sundays, and Mondays, 10 to 4. And like you mentioned, a sponsor level, you can bring yourself or you can bring your family, or bring some friends and introduce them to the museum.
Hey, friends, this is Scott. I want to thank our new sponsor, Code Rabbit. We're shipping more code than ever, and that means there's more code reviews than ever. So that must mean that all these code reviews are going to slow me down. Is that right, Aravind?
Not exactly, Scott. We That's where we also come in. CodeRabbit exactly cuts your code review time into half and your bugs into half. We give you the feedback right in your PR context and helping your developers move faster while they are also generating code more faster. We offer one-click fixes and spot all the bugs and refactor issues, deliver it on your own Git workflow, and help you move really faster in the AI era.
CodeRabbit offers free AI code reviews directly in your code editor. Fix those bugs, find those defects, especially the ones that were introduced by Vibe Coding, and it all does it without breaking your flow state. So you will be able to ship more code than ever. I encourage you to check it out at coderabbit.ai and sign up for a free trial now. How did you get involved in this? You seem like an old soul, but you have a young face, if I may say so. So you're
Yeah,
you're somewhere between 29 and something else.
thank
And
you.
I'm curious, how did you how did you get a career in vintage computing?
Let's see. Well, I mean, I guess I have to blame my dad, and because I went to college, I went to Southern Methodist University, and I was a classical guitar performance major. I I didn't.
That's
I
of course
realized
you're running a vintage computer museum now. Makes total
I
sense.
and I realized pretty quick that it is really difficult, especially for classical guitar, to do anything after school except for teach.
Hmm.
If you're going to be out there performing, there is so much competition. Violinists, it's the same sort of thing. It's just, and it's, thanks to Segovia, making the classical guitar a real classical instrument as opposed to just a parlor instrument. It's, it's a very difficult career, unless you're just, you're lucky or you're brilliant or whatever. But I say, going back to my dad, so I grew up in a Bell System household. My dad worked for Bell Laboratories, and my grandfather, who was living with us until the end of his life, had worked at Western Electric and retired. And my aunt and some other family members also worked in the Bell System. So what did I do after high school? I started pulling cable for an AT&T installer, managing PBXs, a private branch exchange telephone system. So, and I always grew up with remote access. In fact, we didn't have a computer at home in the 80s. We had a terminal, and that would dial in and connect to a machine. And my dad would let me play games in the evenings, and he'd play games too. But so that's where it had the Unix skill set that came from that. But I would say I've always wanted to do something, particularly with PDP-10s, and those were just vanishing. As soon as I was interested in them, it's like they just disappeared from the internet, more or less in the early '90s. So that's where the interest comes from. And I was one of the people that responded to the AltSys PDP-10 request for accounts on Xskeleton in 1997, and I still have an account on that machine. So that's really where that story goes.
As I get older and I both think about the AI future and about where we're going with computing, I also continue to look farther and farther back, and I play with things like this. And I also built an Apple One from like 7400
Oh,
series parts on a board, and I explored some of those kits, and even going back to building Ben Eater's 6502, from original parts. And I'm realizing that more and more, I think we're forgetting how to drive stick shift.
hmm.
How important do you think it is in a world of JavaScript and AI that young people and early in career computing people appreciate these things? Or are we just a couple of old guys that are looking towards the past? And
Well, I think anytime I go to a VCF or like Portland Retro Gaming Expo, it just runs the gamut as far as people, the community there. I mean, you see really young kids, teenagers, and then you see the old timers that lived through it. The reason why living computers is so important, I think, is that you can convey what these machines do as opposed to just appreciating the aesthetic or the 70s colors or 80s design, things like that. And it's that the one thing that always has struck me, especially talk about AI, all of the things that the AI booms and busts that you saw out of Stanford and the MIT AI lab in the 60s through the 70s, the list machine stuff that was going on in the early 80s and through up into the 90s, and the connection machine. There were all these really great attempts to do things, and for whatever reason, not it's not always the greatest concepts or the that win out. There's I wouldn't call them losers, but there's a lot of great things that get sidelined. And now we have so many tools, that make retro computing easy. Like your Altair 8800 right there. I mean, you just plugged it in and suddenly it's doing Pong. It's like if you tried that in 75 or 76, that would have been like 15
Yeah.
minutes
15
minimum.
minutes of flipping switches just to get the bootloader going. Yeah.
Minimum, yeah. And your teletype chugging away at 10 characters per second, loading a paper tape. It's you just had to flip a switch, and it's like, oh.
I did have all the things, like I did have the bootloader pre-done, but you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. We're
Yeah.
getting to experience these things, and it's very like almost cycle perfect, but it's a simulator, not an emulator. But I
Right.
feel like I'm there, but also I got to get rid of the boring bits. But I also feel like I know more about the cloud when I got like multitasking Unix running on it. And I was like, oh, okay. I understand how they did it 50 years ago. So I'm thinking
Yeah.
about how Altair got to Azure and how the
Yeah.
two
Yeah.
are connected over a half century.
Yeah. And and that's a good point. That's a great point, because we kind of have the luxury now of being able to look back and spend time on a lot of these things, and to have such large communities of interest of all ages, where you can add a Wi-Fi dongle to an Atari 800, or it's like, and then there's servers. So I mean, there you go. There's Azure. FujiNet is a great example of an adapter that works on so many different platforms, but it provides you with ROMs, community, new software people have written, old software that's been preserved, and it seems like just about every month at least I hear a new story of some code that's been uncovered and resurrected, or transferred from an old tape, or thought to be lost, mythical things. I was wondering, have you ever read Stephen Levy's book, Hackers?
No? Oh, yeah, of course. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So when I read Hackers, a lot of the things that were written in that book were just, very mythical. And this had to do a lot with the MIT AI lab. It's like you could read about them,
Yeah.
but you couldn't experience things like the incompatible time sharing system.
Oh, yeah. And
If
this is a
you
40-year-old book. This is a 1984 book, and then there was a 1994 redo of this book. But it was Heroes of the Computer Revolution. This book was ahead of its time in 84, telling us about how everything went down. They should
Yeah,
teach this in schools.
they should. Yeah, it should be mandatory reading material.
Yeah.
But it's even in the 90s, it was kind of a desert as far as AI labs work was concerned. I mean, of course, there's GNU Linux and things like that, the GNU project, which came out of MIT as well, but that's on the other side. Uh, the 36-bit stuff, it was just kind of stuck on tapes and sticky tapes and disk packs and things like that, and no one had really had machines to read this stuff. Al Casso of BitSavers has done a lot to recover things. And then, of course, it's just, like I said, it seems like every month there's a new thing that's been uncovered and resurrected and reanimated. So
And I
it's
think it's
really,
such a great opportunity as a hobby. I love it because it's not just looking at old computers, but it's also dragging them kicking and screaming into the future. So like FujiNet
yes.
is plugging in as a serial port into vintage computers and putting them on the internet in a way that both sides, meaning both sides of the interface, are being lied to. We're lying to the Atari, telling it it's on a modem.
Yeah.
Another great example that I love is the Grease Weasel. The
Yeah.
Grease Weasel that allowed me to take 5.25-inch floppy disks that I found that were in my garage for the last 40 years, plug them in over USB-C, get the magnetic flux signal off of them, and find out, here's an assignment I was working on in 1982,
Yeah.
and get those files back. Ray Ozzie sent me some disks that were beta copies of DOS 4 that had never been released that he found in his garage. He sent me those, and I was able to take them off of a floppy with a brand new tool like Greaseweasel. And the idea that that's a floppy that's 40 years old I got on eBay, and that's USB-C, and I can plug them into each other and combine the best of now and the best of then. It's a very it's a very satisfying hobby to be a digital archivist.
I think so. Yeah. And there's so many great tools. And we have our own little software preservation lab. I say little, we have something like 3,000 magnetic media artifacts, including large, ranging from large disc packs, multi-platter, single platter, and then deck tapes and magnetic tapes. And, we're following some of the techniques that Al Cosell pioneered, doing that, baking tapes to get rid of moisture, reactivate binders that cause these things to flake. But it's also, people. One question I had even at Portland Retro Gaming Expo is why interim?
I was a
Why do
little
you,
curious about that. Do I want to support something that's interim?
exactly? And it's like, well, what is an interim? I mean, you can say the Smithsonian's a permanent museum, and it's like, okay, well, for how long? For the interim. So if actually on our website, we have a little fact on the bottom on the main page, and you can read about, why I chose that name. It's it's basically, all of this stuff is fleeting. I mean, it's ephemeral, and a lot of data is still trapped on esoteric carriers. It's just waiting to be recovered. But it's also, we're also in a point of time where we're really close to where all of this stuff was new, and it's just slowly degrading. And it's really, and the name. I mean, I'm sorry if I can call it poetic, but that's how I try to express the urgency
Yeah,
in what we're doing.
yeah. Everything is fleeting, and
Yeah,
everything is in motion.
yeah,
Last thing I wanted to say, though, is that for those who loved and mourn and get whipped into a frenzy every time someone shakes their fist at the cloud and says, "Ah, living computers," it was complicated. It's not as simple as we may have believed. There's a lot of that equipment available. This was not all auctioned off or given away or taken back into someone's garage.
yeah.
As I understand it, the vast majority of the stuff that I saw is either at the Interim Computer Museum or at the MIMS Museum of Technology. Is that a fair statement?
That's absolutely correct. There was in June of 2024, there was a series of articles on GeekWire, and I read those, and I really felt like it was a missed opportunity for GeekWire to celebrate the community, but rather than just like shove a dagger right into their chest and twist it. It was fairly cruel because the public statement and everything that I've said is out there. It's been hard to find for a lot of people because of articles like were published in GeekWire. But it was announced that there was going to be a public auction, and that only a small subset of items were in this consignment. In fact, I think it's only about 30 items that were from LCM. The rest was some great space art, Chesley Bonestell and some others, McCall. There was, an asteroid, spacesuits, Titanic menu. And that's all on Christie's website that were part of this auction. And of course, we had our direction to keep the museum intact. In fact, it was intact up until mid last year, when things were happening and we're actually moving things out. But you're right. The MIMS Museum deserves to be celebrated for stepping up and basically taking everything, including the name, and they are doing that to protect the name and the legacy of that. They have a number of really great things that people saw in public display, as well as things that never were in the collection but never made it out. So I really encourage people to, it's in Roswell, Georgia. It's 45 minutes outside of Atlanta. I've been there. It's great. They also have community events as well. They've got a great event space, and they are currently working on 50th celebration for Apple, which is going to open next spring. I think it's something like 25,000 square feet. I might be wrong.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
It's expansive. And for us, we have a small subset of tools and remote systems, running hardware, things like that in our collection, which we're just over 3,000 square feet. In Tukwila, we're about 3 miles from the airport, from SeaTac, south of Seattle. Yeah, that's right. It was only a very small subset that was actually auctioned.
I think that the internet, and when people get upset on social media, they would have you say that everything was gutted and thrown away and taken away, when it exists, and it's either 45 minutes outside of Atlanta or it's just a few miles away from the airport, which I think is really important. And if you go to icm.museum, you become a member, you can go and visit. You can make an appointment. You can come and see the collection, and you can explore those online things as well. And it's worth noting, as a Microsoft employee, or maybe you're an Intel employee, maybe you're a company that's in tech that uses Benevity, anything that you donate to the Interim Computer Museum, which is a nonprofit, can be doubled by your company. And that cannot be overstated. Isn't that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. We got into Benevity. Let's see, April's when we got our determination, and then May we got in Benevity and put the word out, and it just amplifies your support. If you want to support a charity, it's a great way to do it, because so many of these companies, like you said, Microsoft, Boeing, Meta, Apple, they all do matching donations. So you make a donation and it's going to double. So I appreciate that. Also, I wanted to say as well, we have had people just knock on the door because we're on Google Maps now, and they say, "Hey, I was just going to lunch with some friends, and I saw there's a computer museum here," and that we let them in, and of course
you let them in anyway. Well, as you should, as a museum, we just don't want to flood the place.
And that's really the reason why we have the scheduling, is that so most people we've had in here, let's see, 23. Yeah, so we had 23, and it was comfortable, but we also want to record our numbers, try to figure out the public benefit. But we are going to have a way that people can come and visit that as a non-member, with a suggested donation, a small suggested donation, and then possible conversion into a membership if they're interested in continuing to support. So that'll be on the website under visit soon. So that's the plan.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, as you know, I'm a member, and I'm going to be driving up to Seattle very soon. And on the Sunday in November, I will get on the booking and I will come and see you in person. We'll do some TikToks. We'll have some fun. And if you, my friends who are listening or watching on YouTube or listening wherever you get your podcasts, are a fan of the stuff that I'm doing, I think you should be a fan of the stuff that Stephen and the folks at the Interim Computer Museum are doing. Go to icm.museum, click donate, double your donation with Benevity, get involved in the community. There's a lot of great stuff happening. Explore both icm.museum and sdf.org. And thank you so much, Stephen Jones, for spending time with me today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.